Matthew begins his Christmas story, the story of Jesus, but he doesn't begin at the manger. He backs it up and he begins it with a different kind of Christmas tree, the Jesus family tree. And I know I'm talking about Christmas, but we got to back up to the beginning of the story. So we're kind of going back in time for just a little bit. And Matthew begins the story of Jesus' family tree. It's the genealogy of Jesus. It's a list of names. It's the Jesus family tree. And let's be honest, even if you're a person who loves to read the Bible, you're a Bible person, you're a church person, there's a good chance you skip over this or you read it pretty quickly. Because genealogies, the list of names, can be boring. It's okay to say that. It's okay to say that we can get kind of bored with it, but that's because we're not as familiar with it. In Matthew's time, the audience that Matthew was writing to, Matthew was a Jewish guy writing to a Jewish audience 2,000 years ago. And the people of that time had a very different perspective on genealogies. Because for them, this list of names, this list of the people in their family who had preceded them, this was a way for them to connect to the bigger story, to the stories of all those people. It was a way for them to connect with the story of God, because they would weave these genealogies through what God had done in human history, the stories of the Old Testament. It was their way to find connection to God's activity in this world, and ultimately a connection to God's salvation history in this world. And so these genealogies weren't just a list of names. These genealogies, every name on there was a biography. There was a story wrapped up in that. There was a bigger picture wrapped up in that. And so it wasn't just random names of people who'd come before them. And this is where Matthew begins his story about Jesus. Matthew chapter 1. This is a record of the ancestors of Jesus the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. Now this word Messiah can also be translated Christ. And this word means the anointed one or the chosen one. So right off the bat, Matthew wastes no time, it doesn't beat around the bush, with the very first sentence of the very first book that's included in the New Testament. We see that Jesus is the chosen one of God. Like, this is a bold, audacious claim. And right out of the gun, with the very first sentence, we see Jesus, the Christ. Now, sometimes we get this idea, Jesus Christ, we almost hear Christ as a last name, but it's not. It's not. It's a title. It's a title ascribed to Jesus. It's the role he's in as the Messiah, the chosen one. And this is a bold claim. Matthew comes right out of the gate and says, Jesus is the chosen one for you, to save you from your sins, to rescue you. And he doesn't waste any time getting to that. And then he wants us to know that he's not just the anointed one, but he's the one who's connected to all the right people. Because you got to be connected to the right people in the lineage. One of the prophecies, and when we hear the word prophecy, I don't think so much about future telling. That's not really what prophecy was. Prophecy is more truth telling, and it's often a prediction with a promise. So one of the predictions with a promise about the Messiah is that he would come from the line of David. And so here, Matthew's connecting us with that prophecy. He's connected Jesus there. Jesus comes from the line of David. And when you hear David, you probably associate the David of the Bible with one of his greatest accomplishments. Often when we hear David, we think David and Goliath. This great feat, this little guy taking down the giant. And David was a hero of the Jewish people. He was a hero of faith for them. And then, and you'll read more about that in your reading this week, by the way. And then Matthew connects Jesus with Abraham, taking us back 2,000 years before Jesus to when God gives a promise to Abe and says, Abe, if you'll follow me, I will bless all generations through you. Your lineage, your family will be a blessing to this world. I'll bless all people through your family. And so he makes it clear, Matthew makes it clear that Jesus is connected to all the right people. And we get this. We get the desire to make that connection. Because we'll just put this in terms we get, if you're gonna buy a dog, over in Kentucky, you're gonna buy a horse. And you want that horse to be purebred. You want that dog to be purebred. Like, you wanna make sure that you're getting the right animal. You're gonna check the family tree of that animal. You're gonna see, Oh, was that dog's mommy and daddy purebred? And their mom and daddy purebred, and their mom and daddy. You're going to go back a few generations to make sure, and you're going to want documentation. You're going to pay to get the right documentation. Then you're going to pay extra because you want to make sure if you're getting that purebred animal that it is what you want it to be, that it is what it claims to be. Even with us, even with people, we kind of like knowing where we came from. It's why sites like Ancestry.com and 23andMe do so well, because we want to know where we came from. In the Fitz family, I enjoy looking back into the Fitz family. I like hearing some of the stories recounted and telling some of those stories myself now to my kids. It's fun to know who some of our ancestors or some of our predecessors were and to know about them. I love the stories of tiny little women who stood up to and talked down really big monsters. Fun stories attached to that. I love the stories of the valiant soldiers, courageous, who defended the liberties of others. The stories of brilliant minds who dedicated their lives to making this world better for others. The story of the king. That's right, I'm descended from royalty. You laugh like you can't tell? I mean, come on now. Only problem is a little shadiness with the king. You see, Fitz is actually an Irish prefix that they would give to the son of the king. It means son of the king. Yeah, I'm Fitz, son of the king. And that's what it means. But it doesn't quite mean that, because they would almost exclusively use this title, son of the king, not for the son the king had with the queen, but with the son the king had with the mistress. So I'm Fitz. Let the nicknames begin. Now, I do just feel obligated to speak in this. It's odd, I think even shameful, that if there's a scarlet letter attached to anyone in that story, that it gets placed upon the son and not the father, as though the son had anything to do with that situation, right? That's not on the kid. Now, we all have people in our family tree we'd rather not mention. And back at the time in Bible times when kings or very important people were having their genealogies recorded, they would actually pay extra to leave out the bad. And they would pay extra to keep the cousin Eddie off the family tree. And it was okay in Jewish understanding. You could skip a generation or two and it was still understood as your lineage, as your genealogy. You could skip over the bad. But what's really interesting is that when we come to Matthew, and Matthew's writing the genealogy of Jesus, Matthew does not do that. In fact, Matthew does just the opposite. He includes the messed up people, the shady people. He includes the bad stuff. And we just jump right in. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac, the father of Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That the trifecta, the patriarchs, the men of renown, the heroes of the faith. And then he goes on. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother, father of mother, mother was Tamar. Now you got to understand, at that point in history, you just did not do what Matthew is doing here. You don't include a woman on the list. You don't trace the genealogy that way. Women, they were not as respected, as appreciated as they should have been at that time. That's not to say it was right, it's just to say that's how it was. And so you would not have included a woman. But Matthew doesn't just break the mold and include one. A few verses later, he goes on. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was the widow of Uriah. Matthew, bro, what are you doing? 4 women at the beginning of the genealogy? Bro, what are you thinking? And of the 4 women you mentioned, these 4? These 4, okay, so we got Ruth. Ruth is a bit of a hero. Like there's an entire book of the Bible written about her, dedicated to her. But you need to understand, Ruth was not Jewish. You have the Jewish Old Testament, and within the Jewish Old Testament, you find this short book of Ruth dedicated to a woman who's not a Jew. Like it's outlandish almost that it's even in there, because she was a Moabite. And you need to understand, the Moabites did not get along with the Israelites. In fact, the Israelites, the Jewish people and the Moabites, they had like this fierce, like, they attacked each other. They were at it all the time. I mean, think like Clinton and Trump, right? Like they're at it. I think cats and cards, bears and Packers, right? I mean, they're just always at it. And Matthew intentionally includes a foreigner in the list. And there's Rahab. Rahab, whose profession was prostitution. Now, when the Israelites were about to take over the promised land, leader Joshua sent some spies in to scope out the land, sent some spies to the city of Jericho and said, hey, report back to me and let me know, are we gonna be able to take this city easily or not? And so the spies go in and they realize, man, we could get caught, it's all done, so we need somewhere to hide out and to get out of here in a hurry. And the place they hide out is with Rahab. Now, they don't hide out like that. They just knew men are coming and going from that building pretty regular. We can just scoot right in, hide out. And she helps them. She helps these spies, and she helps out God's people. And because Rahab the prostitute helps God's people, she gets grafted into the Jesus family tree. And then there's David. Now, I know David is not a woman. We're talking about the women. But just look at this. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was the widow of Uriah. Matthew takes a pretty big swing at old Dave on this one. He doesn't point out David's greatest feat, young David who killed Goliath. It doesn't point out David, the psalmist, the songwriter, prayer writer, the one who wrote much of the liturgy, the song and prayer book for the Old Testament church, if you will. He doesn't point out David, the man after God's own heart. David, the one who was so loyal that he refused to strike back to the king who was after him. No. He points out David's greatest scandal. Solomon, whose mother was another man's wife. He didn't list her by name. He didn't need to give her name. Everyone knew. It's Bathsheba. Bathsheba. See, David had gone on his roof and he saw this woman taking a bath. We know it was a bath and not a shower, or else her name would be Shower Sheba. And he, yeah. You can pray for my kids. They got to deal with that stuff all the time. But he sees her taking a bath and he likes what he sees. So he summons her to the palace, has an affair with her. She's pregnant. So he has her husband killed to cover it all up. Oh. And then there's Tamar. Tamar, who dressed up like a woman of the night, all in an effort to seduce her father-in-law so she could have a child from him. In case you wonder about dysfunction in the family, just read the genealogy of Jesus. Now, it's interesting, right? Because we don't often include this as part of the Christmas story. In fact, we don't often start the Christmas story with the genealogy because it can seem a little boring until we understand some of the names and the stories associated. But even when we do, we're like, oh, let's begin in the manger. Let's begin with the angels visiting Mary and Joe. We don't begin with, hey, kids, gather around. Before we open presents, let's talk about Tamar, who tried to seduce her husband's daddy so she could have a kid with him. Like, that's not really where you be. So it makes you wonder, why did Matthew include this? Why did Matthew put in all the bad stuff? Why did he not stray away from this? Well, I think in part, Matthew wanted us to know that Jesus did not just come for sinners, Jesus came from sinners. And before you like take that and run, because that sounds like terrible theology. So hear me on this. Jesus was perfect in conception and life, always perfect, fully God. Fully God. He was also fully human. He was a sinless human. So Jesus, perfect. But he was not born into a perfect family. He was born into a broken, fallen, sinful world. So what we learn about the genealogy is that the story of Jesus is a story of God always drawing near to all people.